Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is part of the Wayne Public Library program, and it is Plant a Pollinator Garden for Earth Day. Tomorrow is Earth Day for 2022, and I'm really excited to invite and join Lourdes Rosario and Kathy Pariser, both Master Gardeners through the Rutgers program. So welcome both Lourdes and Kathy. Kathy, I'm going to hand it over to you to start the program.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on Earth Day. And it's a great time to talk about plants because spring is here and there's nothing better than getting your garden ready to enjoy all through the rest of the summer. So in the talk today, for our celebration, we'll start with the history of Earth Day, and we'll look at the benefit of native plants and how they can beautify our yard. And we'll give you some strategies for planning your garden and look at some actual example of pollinator gardens right here in Wayne. And one of the areas that I think all of us are challenged by is due to all this rain, there's problematic puddles and what we can do about that with the rain garden. Invasive species, disease prone plants, we'll do that and talk about where to buy native plants, where to find beautiful gardens, and we'll review some easy ideas for Earth Day. So this picture here is of the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, and it really got a lot of concern. And this was 1969. It was a time when there was increasing concern about the environment. But this river had gone on fire many times, but it was primed for action. There was a governor who was our first conservation governor because he worked for many years to have the first Earth Day, which happened on April 22nd, 1970, where an estimated 20,000 people participated. So Earth Day is really about people making a difference. And you being here today and talking about plants, you'll make a difference in our environment. And during the 1960s, there were many issues surfacing. It was 1962 when Rachel Carson had her controversial bestseller called Silent Spring. It sold more than 500,000 copies, and it helped raise public awareness and concern for living organisms, for the environments, and the links between public health and overuse of chemicals and pollution. So she had a huge impact that was not recognized until 1980 when she received the Presidential Medal of Honor. 1963, Senator Nelson convinced President John F. Kennedy to go on an 11-state conservation tour. But even that popular president, he had impassioned pleas. They weren't heard. It wasn't enough to bring the environmental movement into the political spotlight. And environmental troubles just continued. And 1966 is a noteworthy time in our area, since many of the power plants were fueled by coal and heavy grades of oil, which led to noxious emissions. There was a haze of smoke on Thanksgiving Day in 1966, and an estimated 200 people died. And that was not the first time New York City suffered from smog. There was also a big problem in 1953. 1969 is another year where there was a massive pollution event with an oil spill in Santa Barbara, California. So Senator Gaylord Nelson, he came up with an insight that there's power with young people, with students. It was a time of turmoil with the Vietnam War. And so he infused the energy of the students, and he organized a teach-in on college campuses. While they were used to organizing protests, now they could work on getting the message out about the need to improve the environment. So in 1969, his idea of a National Day for the Environment, the first Earth Day, happened. and it began to turn things over politically. Senator Nelson's efforts marked the beginning of bold legislation. It was during President Richard Nixon's time that the first Earth Day led to the creation of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, OSHA, the Occupational Safety Act, the Clean Air Act, followed by the Clean Water Act, the Ocean Dumping Act, and in 1972, DDT was banned. So on Earth Day, we all have the opportunity to write the next chapter, and we can do that by planting native plants. One last comment on Earth Day. It's celebrated globally. It's not a national US holiday, but in 2009, the UN named it International Mother Earth Days. And there's lots of things going on around the world. A couple noteworthy were in China, 100,000 people in 2012 rode bikes to reduce their CO2 emissions. There was an Earth Day in Afghanistan where 28 million trees were planted. And in Panama, 100,000 endangered species of orchids were planted and maintained. And so, again, Earth Day is a great time to think about making a difference with pollinator plants. The picture on the right comes from the Laurel Wood website, where they give you a good idea of a plant map with various selection of plants. And the things to consider are what kind of sunlight you have, the color of the plants, the bloom type, what kind of soil do you have and how well does it drain, the height of the plants. Deer resistance is a whole topic in itself. You can find the Rutgers fact sheet number E271. And then ferns, grasses, trees, and shrubs are also something to think about. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lourdes to further discuss pollinator plants.
All right, everybody, and hello and happy Earth Day. We're going to be reviewing a lot of topics today. And the reason for that is because, you know, Kathy and I both share a passion for making things more environmentally friendly, for building gardens that are that create habitat for our insects, for our birds. So we do that through pollinator gardens. One difference that I do want to discuss is what's the difference between a pollinator plant versus a native plant, because there are pollinator gardens and native gardens, right? So a pollinator plant is anything that would attract insects, and as well as there are other things that pollinate plants as well, such as bees, flies, bats. So they would attract pollinators looking for pollen. And some of those plants are native, but some of them are not. In fact, some pollinator plants actually pose a problem. They've been introduced to North America and they can become invasive. So we just want you to be aware that there's a difference between a pollinator plant and a native plant. And some of the plants we're going to discuss today are pollinator plants, but they may not be native. We will discuss native plants as well. But one example, for those of you who have looked into pollinator gardens, one plant that is going to come up a lot is going to be butterfly bush, which you see here on the left. And butterfly bush is a very desirable plant because, you know, it is named butterfly bush because it does such a great job of attracting butterflies. However, butterfly bush has become invasive, and it is now banned in something like 20 states because it does pose a problem. And I know that this is very controversial for some people who just love their butterfly bush. It blooms for a long time and does attract many butterflies. I mean, you know, once it's in bloom, once it is in bloom, you go out to your garden and you're almost guaranteed to see a butterfly on it at some point, right? But we have to be aware that when we are trying to improve our ecosystems and make things better, and in terms of our plants, when we are planting butterfly bush, we may be causing a problem because you may not be seeing it in your own garden, but the seeds are being spread to other places. And particularly if you have hot, dry, gravelly places, it has become an invasive plant. As opposed to a native plant, which are plants that grow in your specific region. So a native plant, for example, a native plant that's native in New Jersey is not a native plant in California, right? So with native plants, they are plants that have grown in your particular region before European settlement. So they were here before Europeans started bringing plants from Europe and Asia. And regarding butterfly bush, you will see all the red represents areas in which butterfly bush is considered rather invasive. It is a plant that was introduced from China, and it appears that in the Midwest states, it is not invasive at this point, but on the coasts, it is. Okay, so let's talk about why native plants. Well, native plants are adapted to the region where they have developed over thousands of years. So they are best adapted to the climate conditions there, to the soil conditions, whether wet or dry, to whatever funguses and whatever other diseases there are. They are best adapted to deal with them. And they are the ones that have grown with the local ecosystems and provide nourishment to the local native insects and birds. Okay, plants from China have not developed with our local native wildlife, and they do not provide what our wildlife needs. Okay. The other thing about native plants is that you don't really need any fertilizer. They've been grown for thousands of years on their own without any help from us in our particular regions. So you don't really have to do anything special for them. And if you plant them in the right soil conditions, you don't really even have to amend the soil. Some people want to, plant something that's meant for clay soils and sandy soils. Well, then the plant is not going to do well because it's just not being sited correctly. But if you use native plants that are adapted to their region and their conditions, they're going to do fine without a lot of input from you. Another thing is that they use less water than lawns. Lawns have to be watered all the time. Native plants don't. They thrive on whatever the local conditions are. They also help prevent erosion. And if everybody remembers 2 years ago when the a lot of New Jersey lakes were closed because of the algal blooms, well, one of the recommendations is that by using native plants, not only do they not need any fertilizers that add to these problems, but they also absorb a lot of the water, a lot of the nutrients, and can actually help prevent all these types of conditions. Native trees in particular are good at sequestering carbon, so they are able to help keep our air clean, and they provide shelter and food for wildlife, beautifying your property year after year with less input from the gardener than non-native plants. And because we do have deer problems, I'm going to give you some deer-resistant plants for sun. And the first one I'm going to start with is Hubrix amsonia. And as you can see on the left, Hubrix amsonia has this beautiful texture to it, very fine leaves. So throughout the summer, it's going to look nice and green for you with this lovely airy texture. It grows about 3 to 4 foot tall, becomes with a rounded shape, And in the spring, it blooms with these lovely blue flowers that you see here on the right, which are attractive to pollinators. Now, I'm going to be talking about this and another Amsonia, and these do have a milky sap similar to the milkweeds. So this is probably what makes them less palatable to deer. But this plant, not only does it have the pretty spring flowers, the nice texture throughout the summer, but in the fall, it turns this lovely yellow color. So it's a beautiful 3-season plant. And again, it's deer resistant. This is another Amsonia. This one is Eastern Blue Star and also blooms in the spring with these light blue flowers. This one will grow about 4 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet tall. Likes average soil. This one will tolerate a little more moisture than Hubrix Amsonia. Hubrix does well in average soils and in very dry soils, where Eastern Blue Star will tolerate a little bit more average to slightly wet. Again, blooms for about 3 weeks in the spring and looks lovely, nice and erect, is not as rounded as Hubrix Blue Star. But both of these plants make lovely plants. You do want to be careful when you are working around them, and if you happen to prune them, you want to be careful not with the sap, because it does produce an allergic reaction for some people, not for everyone, but for some people it does. And this is a clearwing moth here, sipping pollen from an Eastern Blue Star. I don't know if for our audience, if you notice these are actually day-flying moths. Some people, when they first see them, think that they are hummingbirds, but they are not. They're day-flying moths, very pretty. And if you just take a good look at them, you'll realize that they are not a bird, but an insect. And here we have swamp milkweed. Now, most people are familiar with the relationship between the monarch butterfly and milkweeds. So most of our insects are species specific at some point in their life cycle. So remembering again the life cycle of insects, which is egg, larva, and in the case of butterflies, there's a pupa, not for all insects, but egg, larva, pupa, and then adult. Most of us are used to the adult phase of the butterfly. And as an adult, butterflies can sip nectar from any flower. So they can go to any flower that produces nectar and live. But their caterpillars are normally specific to a particular family of plants. And the majority of people are familiar with the relationship between monarchs and milkweeds. But that same relationship exists between other butterflies and other plants, and between the majority of insects with specific plants. So at some point in their life cycle, almost all insects require a specific plant in order to complete their life cycle. And without that plant, they are not able to live. So for the monarchs, again, you have milkweeds. This is a pretty plant that is fairly easy to grow in your garden. Will take average soil conditions and will also take moist soil conditions. It does need full sun, and it's more suitable for the garden than common milkweed, because common milkweed in a lot of gardens, unless you have a wider area or an area where you can control their roots, common milkweed can spread a bit too much for the majority of gardeners. So with swamp milkweed, it's much better behaved and can work in most gardens. And then you get to enjoy the entire monarch life cycle, as you see here. So you have the chrysalis, which all the way on the left. You'll see the chrysalis that appears black. And the reason it appears black is because the butterfly itself is about to emerge from that. And the caterpillar with the adult butterfly all the way on the right. One thing that you want to be aware of is that milkweeds do attract aphids, which you will see in the same photo with the caterpillar, the orange aphids. That's okay. You don't have to worry about killing them. They are not attractive, but they're not going to kill the plant. The plant will survive, and you don't have to worry about spraying it. That's one of the things you don't want to do when your native plant garden or your pollinator garden. If you're using some type of spray to kill insects, well, guess what? Then why plant a pollinator garden? Because you're just bringing them in order to kill them. So it's okay for leaves to be chewed, for leaves to be damaged. It takes a huge amount of eating of leaves for the gardener to even notice it. So note that if you are doing this, you are doing this in order to improve the environment, improve your garden, improve your ecosystems, and it's perfectly okay to have damaged leaves. Okay. A fantastic plant for pollinators is mountain mint, and there are several of them. This one is blunt mountain mint, and the flowers are the very tiny ones that you see, and I'm not sure, can you see my cursor moving there? Okay, so the flowers are the very tiny ones that are starting to come out here or around the outer edges. But the plant itself will appear to be in bloom with these silvery bracts. These are not flowers, but when you look at them from a distance, they appear to be the flowers, almost like they're sugar coated. And they'll appear to be in bloom for a really long time. And probably as far as attracting pollinators and a wide variety of them, mountain mints do the best job. You're going to see butterflies, you're going to see bees, you're going to see wasps, all types of insects that are attracted to this plant. It just provides so much nourishment for them. And it is really one of the most deer resistant plants there is out there. Some deer resistant plants can sometimes be browsed by deer, and then they'll taste them and they'll move on. But this one has a strong scent. They don't browse this at all. I mean, the day that deer start eating this plant, I think we're going to be in real trouble. Another plant that is lovely to have is Pearly Everlasting. And it has these tight, small, white flowers. It's also liked by people who dry flowers because it dries well, looks pretty dried. And it is the caterpillar food plant for the American lady butterfly, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But this one grows till just below the knees, and it will spill over. So it does nicely in places where you would like to have something spill over on the edge. And by having it, if you can see here, the caterpillars, you're going to take a look at the tips of the plant, and you might see what looks like silk or webbing. If you open that up, you'll often find the small caterpillars hiding in that. Whenever you see like a silk or webbing at the tip of a plant, be curious about it. Take a look, peel apart the leaves, see what's there, because often you're going to find an insect that is growing there, that has made a home for itself. And the butterfly looks like this. So by growing Pearly Everlasting, you are going to be inviting this beautiful butterfly to your garden. And here we have hyssop or anise hyssop. This plant grows to about knee high with these lovely lavender flowers. And the leaves are very fragrant. They smell, they have that licorice smell. And it's also a plant that can be used for cooking. You can find a number of recipes on the internet for it. does a fantastic job of attracting bees, particularly. Bees love this plant. And the goldfinches love the seeds. So in my garden from July into August, I get a lot of goldfinches because they are eating the seeds of this plant. So not only are you feeding the bees, but you're also going to be feeding goldfinches. It's an easy plant to grow, comes up from seed, does reseed itself, but I don't find it to be, a nuisance because I enjoy the plant. So why not have more of it? And it tends to say when it reseeds itself, the seeds tend to stay in the same location. So they're not going to jump around on you to different places. And again, it just smells wonderful. So a plant that attracts bees, attracts goldfinches, smells great, and the deer don't like, hey, what more can you want for your garden? And we're going to get to one of the grasses here, little blue stem. Now, grasses are important because they are easy to grow, again, most of them are very deer resistant. And this particular one doesn't get too tall. Some of our other grasses get very tall and are a little bit more difficult to handle. But this one will, when it's in bloom, as it is over here in the photo on the right, that's its tallest point, and it can reach probably about chest high when in bloom. But it's an easy plant that doesn't get too huge. You cut it back in the spring, and is important because it feeds the caterpillars of a number of skippers, which are also members, cousins of the butterflies. And grasses like this also provide ground nesting sites for some of the ground nesting birds. Because a lot of times we tend to think of our birds as having nests high up in trees, but many of our birds actually nest in shrubs and on the ground, and grasses like little blue stem provide a place for them to hide. If you have not yet cleaned up your garden, that's great. You want to wait as long as possible to clean up your garden in the spring. And that is because there are a lot of insects that are just becoming active. They have overwintered as either an egg or some type of immature stage in their life cycle, and are now becoming active. You want to wait as long as possible before you cut anything back in order to give them the opportunity to come out of hibernations, to come out of their winter hiding places. And also, you may have heard the statement, leave the leaves. You're better off not raking up your leaves. When you need to clean leaves up out of an area, move them to a different leaf pile. Don't shred them, don't bag them. A lot of insects spend the winter hiding in leaves. And especially with vegetable gardeners, you hear, oh, get rid of them all because you're promoting disease, you're promoting, insects. But what you're doing is when you remove the leaves, you are removing the insects and the life that you actually want to attract in your garden. And one of the silly things that we do as gardeners is we take away the leaves and then we spend tons of money buying mulch to cover everything up, when all we really need to do is just leave the leaves where they are. And the leaves are best able to provide nourishment back to the soil as they decompose. And unless your pile of leaves is, 5 or 6 inches thick, it's not going to kill the plants. It's not going to kill your lawn. The plants will grow from under the leaves, because after all, that's what they've been doing for years in the woods. They've been coming up all on their own without anybody removing the leaves from the woods. And that's why, and all they do really is improve your soil. Right, so I'm going to stop now as Kathy picks up again.
Thank you, Lourdes. I would add one more thing about leaving the leaves. It's important also because mulch every year piles up. And if we don't remove it, you're going to have a stack of mulch, and that's really not the healthiest things for your plants. The leaves are far better. I live in an area where there's a lot of trees, a lot of mature trees, and that's great. And so I wanted to share with you some of the plants that actually beautify the yard and the deer don't eat them. I'm not sure which one of them are exactly native plants, but the one on the right, of course, is a Christmas tree fern. And to the left is May apple, and a wonderful ground cover is wild ginger. So all of them do very well in part and full shade. But in an area where you have part shade, on the left is a plant called Helleborus, and that, or known as the Lenten rose. That's a real hardy plant, and it's blooms right along with the daffodils. And in the center, you'll see my stilbe is starting to poke through the ground. And throughout the summer, you'll see the brilliant white and red color. So those Astilbe and Lenten rose are two great plants for your part shade. Lourdes also already talked to you about the invasives, and the first picture on the left is that butterfly bush. But one that is really problematic, especially problematic, is the barberry bush, and that's in the center. You'll look in your woods, and the first thing that you'll see blooming is the barberry bushes. And what they're doing is choking out the saplings from the oaks and the maples. And so it's surprising that these bushes are still being sold. They are a pretty color, but it is problematic on a number of fronts, including this plant. This shrub is warm, and ticks tend to gravitate to it as well. On the right is the burning bush. That's a pretty one too, but that one also has become invasive. And so there are a lot of other plants that you can select that would be better suited to your property and for the pollinators. You may have seen some of these invasives growing in your yard. In the upper left-hand corner, that is garlic mustard. The deer don't eat it, and it also takes over after your wooded area. So if you see garlic mustard growing in your yard, that's one to immediately pull. As is to the right, that's called the mile-a-minute weed, and that got here by mistake from Japan, and it's taking over. Again, this is one to pull. At the bottom, that's my yard too. There in the left, you'll see stilt grass is growing, and that's another invasive. And so what has happened with the deer everywhere, that these plants seem to be taking root. The final plant I wanted to highlight for you, I think I took this picture over on Ratzer Road at the corner of Alps. That's called the tree of heaven. That's because this invasive spreads to the heavens really quickly. And there's has absolutely no benefit, and it chokes out the native plants. And to get rid of it will require a procedure where in July you have to cut it and then put herbicide on it. So if you have one of these in your yard, it's time to do your research. Penn State has a very good description of it on their website, and take action on this tree of heaven.
And Kathy, I'm just going to add something on that one with tree of heaven. Another reason you really want to learn how to identify it and remove it, it is the preferred host of the spotted lanternfly. You're seeing signs all over the place. You see it on the news all the time about spotted lanternfly and removing it and killing it, because this is a very invasive insect, again, here we go with that word invasive, things that have come from across the ocean, from either Europe or Asia, and are damaging our ecosystems. And the spotted lanternfly, if you are not familiar with it, when you get, not only does it kill our trees, but when you get a large population of them, they make a huge mess. Like, there are places where ball fields with bleachers and things like that, where people can't sit in those bleachers due to the mess that the spotted lanternfly leaves behind. So please learn to identify tree of heaven, and it is one way to help prevent the spread of the spotted lanternfly.
Okay, thank you. Oh, the Bradford pear, here we go again, another invasive. This one looks so beautiful. It's one of the first trees to bloom. And when they're young and they're lined up in early spring, they look great. But it's a very poor choice because the branch structure is weak, and after the 15 to 20 years, they'll fall apart. On top of that, it's an invasive plant. And that is what you'll look into the woods and you'll see the first white trees blooming. That's the Bradford pear. I read an article in the USA Today this week. It said they stink too. So that's another reason not to have the Bradford pear. Well, there's some diseases that happens. And what we're seeing on cherry and plum trees, this nice tree on the right had to come down because it had the black knot fungus. And it just spreads through the air from tree to tree. There's really, I could not find a way to remedy the situation. So your best bet is to not plant plum or cherry trees, even though you may think they're beautiful. They could be a problem for you. So I'd like to move now to my favorite pollinator garden. This is a picture of a very nicely manicured garden at Preakness Healthcare Center. And my master gardener class of 2016 planted it. And I'm going to take you on a quick walkthrough of how my garden grew. So here we are with a bunch of little plants on the left. You can see we had a hose in there to make sure things get watered. Your plants early on need to be watered in that first year so they gain hold, and it takes about 3 years for them to be established. And on the right, you'll see that was Rachel and Doris who helped us, the class, design the garden. By 2017, our plants were doing beautiful. It's a full sun garden. We've got a terrific fence. And we were able to mound some soil, put some attractive rocks in, and we were off to a really good start. By 2018, you'll see to the left the black-eyed Susan. We have salvia, we have maiden grass and Joe Pye weed. And the garden continues to grow in its only second year, but it's beginning to fill in, because ideally, with a pollinator garden, there won't be a lot of room for weeds. The plants will fill in. And now we're looking at 2019. Look how big the black-eyed Susans have grown. That's a serviceberry tree with the pollinators love in the back. And you can see here that we have different plants blooming at different times of the year. One of my favorite that I learned about is the Joe Pye weed. It grows really tall and makes a nice backdrop. And in the front, in the yellow, we have butterfly weed, and in the back is the maiden grass. So those are a couple of ideas to think about the color, the season. There's also some Baptista in there, and each one blooms at a different time. Up front, you'll see the salvia in bloom. There's some 500 species of them, but they have spread out nicely in the garden. So this garden has some bee balm as well. That's the red plant in the front and the crane's bill geranium. Those are also two nice plants if you have full sun and you have the benefit of a fence to control the deer. So I went to visit the garden in just beginning of April, and that's what it looks like. So as Lourdes said, wait until you trim the dead material off, and it's just starting to wake up. We did plant a few daffodils for spring color, and it turned out the county, I think, was so proud of this garden that they added arborvitaes on the other side of the fence. So if you have the opportunity to be at Preakness Healthcare Center, stop by and look at this beautiful garden. So this is my rain garden, and it really addressed a problem that a lot of us are facing, and that's a problematic puddle. And what you'll see in the red circle is a puddle that lasts days after some of the larger rainstorms. And where the blue arrow is, you'll see I had big U's, but the deer ate all of them. So the solution was to start digging because the soil needed to be conditioned, and dug about 12 to 18 inches down and pulled out a bunch of rocks, added compost and coarse sand. This is not a native plant on the left. You're going to see a lot of ship laurel plants. They're deer resistant. They provide a good screen between the yards, and the butterflies and bees all love them. On the right, you'll see, this garden was just planted. The plants are very small. And then what happened was Storm Isaiah. And that's my garden, covered in major trees. It felt like a tornado came through. And so fortunately, most of the trees, plants bounced back. I just took this picture on April 20th after the storm. And although it's a little wet on the right-hand side by the ship laurel, they seem to be holding their own. And it just looks like the plants are ready to bloom. So I'm excited about that. Another topic to think about for Earth Day is, what do we use to water our plants? If you live in Wayne Township, our water bills have gone up, and using a rain barrel is a good way to have water that's not chlorinated. You can water your plants from that. This happens to be the Garrett Mountain Garden that Lourdes cultivated. And we would go, I went with Lourdes on a couple of times with a pail in hand to the local creek to water the plants. So she added a rain barrel, and that has been helpful to have a convenient source of water at that area. Once you become more and more interested in gardening, there's so much to learn, and I continue to learn. So here are a few of my favorite places. And of course, the number one is Laurelwood Arboretum. And that is just fantastic. If you're down in Delaware, the Mount Cuba Center, in Morristown, the Frelinghuysen Arboretum. Caldwell has a pollinator garden. It's not big, but it's worth a visit. And the New Jersey Botanical Gardens, there's much to see there. And I understand that the lilacs right now, I would say the next 2 weeks, like Mother's Day, it's a great place to go. There's a special group that works there on the lilacs. Bowman Hill near New Hope is a great place to visit. Make sure you go on a docent tour. They haven't been doing them the past 2 years. Their area is all fenced in. to protect from the deer. So you will see a lot of interesting plants growing with experts that take you on a tour. Last but not least is on my wish list, and I will be there. It's called the Scott and Hella McVeigh Poetry Trail in Princeton. It's really some type of big field with a lot of sun and some poems. So I plan to go visit there. Now, to buy pollinator plants, going to Home Depot is not your best choice. You want to talk to people that have expertise in plants, and you could find that the first place that probably has the most comprehensive library of seeds and catalog of small plants is Toad Shade Wildflower Farm, and they do mail order. I was on it the other day. They have a lot of plants. Many of them are already getting sold out, so you have to go there early. Canetti on Black Oak Ridge Road has a good selection of native plants, and Rossler's in the Allendale Nursery is even better. Condorosos in Montville and Glen Wild in Bloomingdale are both good choices. And I have not been to the last one, but I've been told that Cooper's Farmside Gardens, if you're up in Sussex, are good places to check out. So I'm going to just summarize what we talked about today and then turn it back over to Lourdes for her closing. I would say for those who attended, thank you for listening and your interest in learning about pollinators, and give your yard a gift this Earth Day. Select a portion of your yard, just start small and turn it into a pollinator garden, and you'll learn along the way. The Rutgers Master Gardeners, they're there on the phone. They have certain hours, can answer questions, and go to a good nursery where they can also advise you. We talked about those invasive plants. Take action on those. Think about a rain barrel. And one website that I do recommend among many, but is that jerseyfriendlyyards.org. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lourdes.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And yes, we have a couple of other things for you. In addition to Jersey Friendly Yards, also the Native Plant Society of New Jersey has a wonderful website where you can learn about plants that are native to New Jersey. They have all types of events going on. Native Plant Society holds, well, in between the local Bergen-Passaic chapter and the state chapter, you will have opportunities to see many presentations on native plants, and they are free. They also have a YouTube channel where they record these presentations so that you can watch them there as well. So that's another one. That's npsnj.org, the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. I hope that all of you watching have actually visited Laurelwood Arboretum. If you have not, the Arboretum is a 30-acre arboretum certified by ArbNet, which is a national organization that recognizes arboretums for their woody plant collections. Now, Laurelwood is best known for its rhododendron and azalea collection, but it has many other plants as well, including a native plant garden. And the azaleas and rhododendrons, their peak season will be coming up now in May. So if you have not already visited, please make sure you get to Laurelwood. It's absolutely amazing place. And you can go to our website for what's in bloom, for upcoming programs and things like that. And that is laurelwoodarboretum.org. One other thing, especially this Sunday, we have Dr. Doug Tallamy speaking, and actually live. You don't have to watch him on Zoom. And Dr. Tallamy is really the foremost expert in terms of building better gardens that are friendlier for our ecosystems. He has written something like 100 research papers that talk about the interaction between plants and insects. And he's the author of numerous books. And I'm mentioning him because he's one who has inspired me and where I've learned so much. So he has, he's the author of several books. So if you're interested, if this is a topic that if you have found this presentation useful, you're going to love Dr. Talamy. So please go to laurelwoodarboretum.org and you can see him this Sunday at 2:30 in the afternoon. Again, please, do celebrate Earth Day. Do what you can to make your garden more eco-friendly. Begin by taking small area of your lawn that you convert to a pollinator garden. Try and do it by focusing on native plants. And remember to leave the leaves. Don't clean up your garden too early. And another source is, of course, my own native plant channel, which you will find. There is no website. You will find it on YouTube and on Facebook, where you will find videos on a number of native plants to help you become familiar with them, discuss how they grow, what you need, what kind of conditions they need. And also you're going to find virtual tours of many different gardens, native plant gardens, so that you can see plants in action, see what they look like, and learn much more about them. So again, thank you so much for being with us. And I do see in the chat that we have some questions. I think, let's see. I'm seeing one regarding butterfly bush does not feed butterflies. Butterfly bush does provide nectar for butterflies. What it does not do is provide food for them at any other stage other than their adult stage. Because again, the adult butterfly stage can drink nectar from any plant that produces it, such as butterfly bush, but many others. But it will not help the life cycle of butterflies in terms of feeding their caterpillars. Because butterflies, again, are species specific, as are most insects, and the more immature stages of their life cycle, they will need a specific family of plants or otherwise they won't live. I see a question also regarding pollinator gardens on decks. Yes, they can absolutely be successful in containers. There are many pollinator plants, many native plants that grow in containers. So yes, you definitely can be successful with that. In fact, I'm trying to remember how he spells his name, but you can look for him on the internet. There is a man who has a native plant container garden on his balcony in Brooklyn. And he has published a list of the native plants that have worked for him that attract pollinators to his Brooklyn balcony. I know that his first name is Noah, and I believe his last name is spelled Ratzen, Ratzen, or something along those lines. But if you Google balcony, well, probably balcony container gardening and Noah, it will probably come up for you. Noah Ratzen, I believe his name is. Seeing a question regarding rain gardens. And rain gardens are meant for spots that tend to stay moist, but that doesn't mean that they have to have water the entire time. So if the soil tends to stay wet or doesn't completely dry out, yes, you can use plants that are friendly to rain gardens in that spot. And pollinator plants for shade. There are some, not a lot of them. See if I can think of any at the moment. I'd have to nothing is coming to my mind right now, but in general, the pollinator gardens tend to be more in sun, but there are still plants that are very useful in terms of feeding insects and helping them complete their life cycle. And black-eyed Susans being native, yes, there are native black-eyed Susans. And there, Noah Ratson, somebody found it. I see the name in the chat. That is correct.
I think, Lourdes, we have one more about putting a rain garden where my side flower bed, 2 feet wide. I think that's probably a challenge a lot of people have. It's not so much a rain garden, but it sounds like it's probably full sun, right? And then you would have to think about the height and width, how much spread on the plants would go in that area.
Yes, there are going to be a number of plants, and I guess the concern is that they don't grow too tall.
They don't go too tall, right, right. So
Because there are plants, the biggest challenge is finding those that are going to be deer resistant unless you have that area protected. Because there are going to be many plants that will grow in those conditions. The big challenge is going to be finding them deer resistant. So
I
you want
wonder if like a spice bush or viburnum would work if you keep them trimmed. Those are native bushes.
spice bush. Another one is clethra summer sweet will do well and smells fantastic. The pollinators love it. So summer sweet, by the way, summer sweet, there we go. Pollinator plant for shade. There's that's a shrub. We have it at Laurelwood right in front of the Nippenberg Center for Education, the KCE, and it will bloom in shade. It is a shrub, so it's not, it's going to be depending because there are a number of cultivars. It can get as tall as 8 foot, but there are others that are 5 or 6 feet tall, but that will do well in average soils. It does well in wet soils, blooms in the summer, smells fantastic, and will grow in both sun and shade. So
So I would think for that challenge, it might be worth looking at some native bushes for that area by the driveway, but just having them trimmed and ones that are deer resistant. Good. Are bees and butterflies harmed by products like deer fence? To keep the deer off when you spray.
That question has been asked many times. My understanding is that as long as you are not spraying it while the bees are actively working on the flowers and wetting the bees, my understanding is that no, that it does not harm them, that you can use the deer repellent products, the sprays, and that they do not harm the bees as long as as long as the product has dried. What you want to do is, use the natural products. A lot of times with the bee houses and things like that, we have to recognize also that there are diseases that are transmitted in those communities. And, if you're not cleaning them out, those diseases are remaining, the bacteria, the funguses, whatever, are remaining in those tubes. Basically, number one, it becomes more work. Number two, nature takes care of itself. A good way to leave, the best way is to just leave stems up, the hollow stems like Joe Pye, a number of other plants that have hollow stems. Again, don't cut them back to the ground. Leave them 6 to 12 inches taller if you can tolerate them. And, plants in the spring will grow very quickly. If you've left a hollow stem, the hollow stems of your perennials up, within a very short time, you will no longer see them because the rest of the plant has grown around them. And yet you will leave those stems where the bees can use them and nest in them. So that's the best way to leave it. There's also bees nest in the ground. Another reason not to use mulch. Most of our native bees are actually solitary. They don't have hives the way that we think of, with the honeybees, which is European, by the way. What we think of as the honeybee is actually European. It is not native. Most of our native bees are actually solitary, and many of them nest in the ground. So covering the ground with mulch is actually taking away nesting places for our native bees. And regarding wood and things like that, keep a brush pile. When you remove branches, if there's places where you want to remove leaves from your property, just keep a brush pile and somewhere that you don't find offensive, that you can hide it on your property. And that way you are still leaving a place for our insects where they can live, where they can hide. By the way, another reason to keep your leaves is for one of my favorites actually is for fireflies. Fireflies hide in leaves and need the moisture. So removing leaves from your property, you're actually killing fireflies. And I believe
The end. Thank you,
we have
Lauren.
reached the end. Well,
I think there were maybe two more questions, and forgive me if you've already answered. Somebody was asking about the zone, the hardiness zone that we're in.
Number 6.
Yeah, that is changing as we get warmer. We are considered, depending on where you are, by the way, because it also depends on altitude. So it may not be the exact same everywhere throughout, the area. But we can either be 6B, and some areas are leaning warmer towards even 7A. And then, if you're in a colder spot, you would be a 6A, but you're 6 and even getting into sometimes 7A.
And there was one last question: are container pollinator gardens annuals?
No, you can create container pollinator gardens with native perennials. With native perennials, yes. And in fact, the name that I mentioned earlier, he was doing it with perennials. The majority of our native plants are actually not annuals. Most of our natives are not annuals at all, which saves you a lot of work. You don't have to replant them every year.
And there's one last question that just popped up here: how do you overwinter perennials in containers?
You would, if you want to overwinter perennials in containers, you want to use perennials that are hardy, I would say, to like zone 5, which means that they can tolerate the cold, because in a container, their roots are much more exposed to colder temperatures than they would be if they were in the ground. So they need to be more cold hardy than they would be if they were planted in the ground. So if you choose to overwinter perennials in a container, you should get perennials that are hardy to at least zone 5. And then for the winter, move them closer to your home where they stay in a protected spot. Like if you have some type of overhang, some type of place under a deck or something like that, where they can be somewhat protected from the elements. I have shrubs that I grow in containers. I have hydrangeas in containers because hydrangeas are very cold hardy. Native hydrangeas are very cold hardy, but in my garden, they would be devoured by the deer. So I keep them on my deck, and basically for the winter, move them against the home under an awning, and they've survived. This is going to be their 3rd year now. So that's one possibility for you as well.
I think the last question that popped up here was, do they need to be repotted in the container?
Eventually, any plant in a container, whether it's a house plant or an outdoor plant, eventually the soil in the container does break down and they will need repotting. It is something, they should be able to go 2 years in a container without repotting, depending on, how quickly the plant grows. So, if you notice that the roots are bursting out of the container, then it's time to repot them. But container soil does break down and you will need fresh soil, but I would say they should last 2 to 3 years in the container without repotting, depending on how quickly the plant grows.
I think that's all of our questions. I wanted to add, when you spoke earlier about the spotted lanternfly, for those of you who are unaware, the Wayne Public Library, along with the Rutgers, New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, Amy Rowe, who is from there, as well as Katie McEwen of the Wayne Environmental Commission, we did a program last year together that is available on the Wayne Public Library YouTube page about the menace of the spotted lanternfly, the Stomp It Out program. They're now being seen as we come in the spring, and several people have told me that they have actually seen their re-emergence. So if you need a reviewer to review the information, it is available on the Wayne Public Library YouTube page. I want to thank very much Lourdes Rosario and Kathy Pariser for joining us tonight and educating us and making sure that we are the ones who can celebrate Earth Day, to do the things that we need to for the environment, and to also make sure that we are supporting the pollinators and doing the right thing for our soils, for our plants. And I always learn something. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Please get out there, garden, but don't clean up too early.
Take pictures. Bye now.